Hi everyone, and welcome back to your online lectures. I hope that you're enjoying this format for content delivery. Please feel free to give feedback as to what works and what doesn't with your own style of learning. In the second module, we will cover BRIMS chapters 6 through 8. First, in chapter 6, we will discuss the intake interview. The intake interview is usually the first face-to-face interaction between counselor and client. This period of time is incredibly important for a number of reasons. For example, you are beginning the relationship. BRIMS noted that this is probably the single most important assessment tool available to clinicians who work with children and their families. In order to build a holistic understanding of the client, collecting data begins before the first face-to-face contact. Some of the pieces of information that you'll need to consider include the client's preferred name or nickname, the client's age and date of birth, information about the mother's pregnancy and delivery. Any complications during pregnancy or delivery might cause issues later. The current family structure, including any other families that the client has been with. For example, a child in foster care may have had experiences in other family structures that could still be impacting his or her adjustment. Any legal involvements, examples include reports of abuse, parental divorce, or juvenile charges, current living arrangements, and information about previous treatment episodes. To facilitate the process of collecting preliminary data, many agencies will send out initial paperwork in the mail so that the client's caregivers might have an opportunity to collect needed information. Be sure that you offer assistance to the family. There could be a number of reasons why family members could have difficulty with this task, such as reading level or language differences. There are a number of important topics to be covered during an intake interview, and we will discuss each of these individually next. First, the family is going to present an initial problem or issue. From this point forward, one of your tasks will be to assist the family in understanding that every family system has issues and that these are often bigger than the identified client. Determine what other problems exist in the family system and inquire about each of these. I'd encourage you to begin with the problem that the family or child presents first, as this is the issue that has brought them to treatment. As you listen to and validate the family's experience with the presenting issue, you will also be building rapport. Use this initial interaction to guide the conversation into exploration about other issues. Also during this time, I might suggest that you employ solution-focused techniques, such as looking for exceptions, to start to assess the family's ability to solve problems on their own. By focusing on the family's strengths at this point in the interview, you are demonstrating support for their past successes in managing stress. BRIM's discussion of the initial intake interview is very thorough, and I would encourage you to hang on to this resource if you plan on working with children and their families. My one critique of the intake interview format that she provides is whether or not this level of interaction will be feasible in the real world. Meaning, I'm not sure that very many agencies can afford to keep a clinician in an intake interview for 4 hours or more, much less more than one clinician. Regardless, the level of detail provided in Chapter 6 is more than adequate as you think about what's important to consider during the intake. After your exploration of the presenting problem and other family issues, you might want to assess existing family relationships. Some questions that you could ask are included in slide 9. As you explore family relationships, pay attention to your own reactions. As you listen to the family describe these relationships, you will begin to understand the presenting problem and other problems that the family described in their context. You might also start to feel yourself react to what you are hearing, especially if the information presented is similar to your own family of origin, or if what you are hearing is very different from your own personal value system. Remember, you must remain neutral. The family members don't need to be judged for their history. Schools can be an important source of information regarding the presenting problem and associated issues with your client. It will be important for you to understand your client's academic functioning and social functioning at the school. Pay attention to any dramatic shifts in behavior or in relationships, as this could be indicative of a deeper problem. Of course, you will want to pay attention to privacy issues and request appropriate releases of information from the source. Your client and/or the client's family, if the child is a minor, will have to provide consent, as educational records are protected by the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. Be sure that you familiarize yourself with this and other federal mandates that will affect your work with children. As you talk with parents, family members, the client, and other adults with whom the child has a relationship, be sure to inquire about social and peer relationships. Remember to pay attention to your developmental milestones as you consider where your individual client ought to be with regards to forming and maintaining social relationships. BRIMS provides some good guiding questions here. There are a number of socio-cultural factors to think about whenever you're assessing any client, including children. These issues might surface later as barriers to treatment, or they might serve as strengths that the family and the client bring with them to the treatment relationship. Financial status, transportation issue, general attitudes, culture, ethnicity, religious affiliation, family rituals, and family secrets are included here to guide your thinking. Remember, the intake interview is your opportunity to assess the client and the client's family from a holistic perspective. Just as we all have interests outside of work and school, so do our clients. Does the client's family support extracurricular activities? Does the family participate in leisure activities together? What other people are around that the family might provide social support? While these sorts of questions might not seem relevant to counseling, building a comprehensive picture of the client's life will facilitate the counseling process. Finally, developmental issues and health-related issues might also have a significant impact on the client's treatment. These are important to consider for the client, but also for other family members. For example, let's imagine what life would be like for a client if one of his siblings was chronically ill. How might that impact the client's self-esteem, psychological health, his membership in the family system? It's important to assess developmental and health issues that are significant for other family members if these are relevant to the client's treatment. Remember to pay attention to any indications of current or past abuse and neglect as well. Next week, we're going to practice recording behavioral observations. This particular skill set is quite important, especially when working with young people, as their language skills are less developed. Chances are that most of your behavioral observations will occur alongside other activities, such as during different steps of the intake interview. There are lots of different models for recording behavioral observations. We'll use one in class that is fairly simple and straightforward. If you have a behavioral theoretical orientation, you will likely be involved in a lot of behavioral observations with a much more sophisticated approach. For our purposes in class, we'll focus on the antecedent to the behavior itself, and any consequences of the behavior. Sound familiar? Here, BRIMS suggests important components to consider during observations such as cleanliness, appropriateness of dress and appearance, physical characteristics and mannerisms, adjustment to the intake process and meeting with a stranger, affect and mood, communication and general interaction styles, capacity for cooperation, and negotiation. BRIMS has a complete description on page 140. As you prepare for the intake interview, there are a number of factors to consider. Some of these are listed here. I would encourage you to work hard to accommodate schedules within the boundaries of what is allowable by your agency. I would also encourage you to start the rapport building process with the parents during the initial phone contact. Sometimes agencies will ask receptionists and administrative professionals to make these scheduling calls. For me, I always called to schedule my own clients, as I felt like it was important for me to protect the parents' privacy, but also offer my support. I include a BRIMS chart from page 142 here. This is a great list of topics that might come up during the initial contact. Be sensitive to the notion that parents might not know what sort of questions to ask you, so I would encourage you to offer information that is listed here. BRIMS offers a lot of detail in describing the format and structure of the intake interview. Like I mentioned earlier, agency policy might not allow for the leisure of a four-hour intake interview. You'll need to work within your agency's policies to gather the information that you need, but BRIMS does provide discussion of the possible ways in which you could approach the structure of the interview here. In some situations, you might have the luxury of working with a co-counselor during the intake. Again, this will likely be decided by agency policy or availability of other counselors. There are advantages and disadvantages to this approach. First, with a co-counselor, you could cover more ground in a shorter amount of time, and you have the added benefit of a second professional opinion when it comes to treatment planning. Conversely, the working styles of each counselor should be considered ahead of time, and parallel treatment can introduce issues of confidentiality. This particular point might be important for us to discuss in class as we continue to consider ethical implications of working with children. BRIMS offers some final thoughts at the end of Chapter 6. The format of the intake interview, in addition to being dependent upon agency policy, should also be set to respect the needs and developmental level of all family members. Finally, talk to family members beforehand and describe the rules surrounding confidentiality. Whenever you are interviewing the family, remember that one of your primary tasks is to move away from the notion of an identified client. Work to build rapport with family members and work to focus in on what the family does well. I will often employ solution-focused strategies here to start off the interaction from a strengths-based perspective early on. BRIMS offers some suggestions here for your consideration. During the family interview, one of your tasks will be to assess the family's functioning. Think about how members of the family interact with each other. Who are the dominant members? Who is more reserved? Are there healthy boundaries evident in the family system? Where are the boundaries? Also, consider the family's competence. Once again, solution-focused strategies might be helpful here as you can assess the family's competence in part by asking about how they have handled problems and stress in the past. You will also get an idea of the family's competence through observations. Aside from assessing the family structure and family competence, BRIMS also suggests paying attention to the family's process and ways of relating. How do they interact? Do certain members speak in certain orders? What communication patterns did you observe? How does the family describe interacting with others outside of the family system? Is there a strong cultural network? Do the family's belief systems impact the ways they relate with the outside world? After the family interview, BRIMS suggests interviewing the parents. During this portion of the interview, gather background information about the client. Be sure to let the parents know that this is your intention with this section of the interview, as you will be asking much more direct questions, which can sometimes come across as non-caring. Chances are good that you will have some sort of form to guide this section of the interview so that you don't forget to gather the needed information. In addition to gathering information about the client, use the interview with the parents to assess parenting styles and discipline strategies. Lastly, inquire about the parents' families of origin and the spousal relationship. How were the parents parented? What similarities and differences exist? These guidelines were offered based on the assumption of a nuclear family and the assumption that two parents are present. As you all know, the nuclear family is only one possible family constellation. Adjust these strategies as needed to suit the families that you work with. In some situations, you'll have opportunities to interview the client's siblings. Depending upon the ages of the brothers and sisters, you can structure your time with them to meet their developmental needs and abilities. The sibling interviews will afford you a fresh perspective on the presenting problem and will give you insight into the client's first peer group. Whenever you first meet individually with the identified client, you'll have lots to think about. Your primary focus during this time is to build rapport with the client as you gather information. Be sure that you set the parameters for the child so that he or she knows what is expected in your office and/or the playroom. Use language that is appropriate for the child. Be flexible and permissive, and allow the child to make choices about how to structure the time. Limit setting is critically important to the success of therapy with children. Brims offers a series of suggestions for how to handle any violations of established limits. I believe that her suggestions are sound, and I'd encourage you to use a similar strategy. Remember, children push boundaries so that they know where they are. This can be frustrating for us, so it's important to maintain a stance of neutrality whenever this happens. Monitor your own emotional response to the violation and remember to enforce your policies consistently. As you begin the interview with the identified client, pay attention to how the client separates from the family. Be sure to orient the client to what is expected in the playroom and what the client can expect from you. Allow the client to explore the playroom and the tools available to him or her. Be permissive and remind the client that he or she is in charge. In Brims' model, the feedback and recommendations section of the intake interview is a time for you to bring back all of the members of the family to discuss your observations and recommendations for treatment. This is your opportunity to open the discussion regarding how treatment will proceed. Be sure that you explain your observations and recommendations in language that is free of jargon and easily understood. As you describe your conceptualizations, remind the family of the presenting problem and then describe your interpretations and recommendations. Brims suggests using an opening summary, which you can prepare beforehand. This might be especially important early in your work with families and children as you develop your own personal style. Remember that the family members will be more invested in treatment success if they feel as if they've been heard. Have some flexibility regarding your recommendations and outline a number of treatment options. As you offer your feedback, work with the family members to set goals for treatment. Everyone that is invested in this process will have some idea of what they hope to have happen during treatment. If you can honor their wishes, then they will be more likely to support the treatment process. This is a big chapter with a lot of really good information. During class next week, we will work to apply the information in a meaningful way.